Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see, because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Celebrated. The book, It Came From Something Awful by Dale Byrne.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, I'm back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So glad to be back. The longtime listeners to our program know that every spring my sister-in-law organizes, one of my sisters-in-law, organizes a family vacation. And since the whole rest of my family all live in Michigan, this is literally the only time every year that Louise and I see my brothers and their wives and their kids and their, everybody. And so Louise and I and one of our kids, we had two of them were going to go, but life got in the way. And two of my brothers, which was really sweet, one of them I haven't seen in a couple of years, were able to show up. And, we spent a week together. It was very, very nice. And I'm very grateful to Jefferson Smith for taking the time out of his busy schedule over at X-Ray FM, the radio station down the road here that carries this show here in Portland. That Jefferson helps start and runs and has a show on and all kinds of stuff. And you can, easily track all of his stuff down online as well. But thank you to Jefferson Smith at X-Ray FM also for helping support us and giving me a week off, because it's getting crazy. It is getting genuinely crazy out there. And, both the political stuff and then, my general craziness starts next week. I'm going on book tour here. So that's going to be, that's back into the airplanes. Hopefully the coronavirus has not extended itself into that realm, although there's some kind of crud that's like bronchitis that seems to be going around. I got it. 3/4 of our family got it on this trip. And Sean now has it. And she got it while I was out of town. So, and I, going through the airport in Houston last week, or Saturday when we came home, it was like everybody was coughing. There's something going on. Anyhow, that's not really what I want to, sorry to bore you with the details, but I wanted to talk about what it's going to take to beat Donald Trump. We're on the edge of an election here, right on the edge of an election. And I think that there's, really our topic, I guess, for the first hour is going to be what's it going to take to beat Donald Trump? Not necessarily who, but what. And I want to get into that in just a second. By the way, just to give you a lineup for the day, In about 25 minutes, Greg Palast is going to drop by, our old friend who just won a major lawsuit in Georgia that you're going to want to hear about. In the second hour of our program, California Congressman Ro Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is going to be with us for the full hour, taking your calls. And in our third hour, Ingrid Newkirk, who is with PETA, is going to be here with us for our Science Revolution piece. She has a new book out called Animal Kind, which is absolutely fascinating. And we're going to get into, political stuff and all kinds of other stuff. But here's the point that I wanted to make, and I'll just summarize it pretty straightforward. I wrote this up this morning, posted it on Facebook, turned it into a thread on Twitter, and I'll just share it with you straight up. Americans love disruptors. It's part of our political DNA. This country was birthed in disruption, the Revolutionary War. Not every country starts with a revolution, or a war for that matter, and this one did. And it's been part of our political DNA ever since. We had, George Washington as president, who was like, okay, we're going to stabilize things. And then John Adams came in and he says, no, we're going to turn hard right. And he started putting people in prison, newspaper publishers in prison, for writing editorials saying things, about John Adams that he didn't like. And his presidency was bizarre. And so Jefferson came along as a disruptor and said, no, we're going to have another American Revolution. And Jefferson and many of the people of his era literally referred to the election of 1800 as the Second American Revolution. And in fact, Dan Sisson and I wrote a book with that title about that election, which was an amazing, amazing story. You can find the book wherever fine books are sold. So then, then things got back to kind of semi-normal for a while, and then Andrew Jackson comes along and says, I'm going to disrupt things, and we're going to pay off the national debt, and we're going to kill the Second Bank of America, and which he did, by the way, producing the longest and deepest Great Depression in the history of America, but he did. People wanted disruption. Abraham Lincoln, his disruption, of course, the Civil War. Not that he started it, but he finished it. Abraham Lincoln's disruption, although painful, altered our country forever, for the better. Then, the great disruptors, Teddy Roosevelt, the Republican Roosevelt, in the 1900s, the progressive Republican, and then Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s, the progressive Democrat, massively changed the fabric of America. And Americans loved them for it. Americans love their disruptors. Jack Kennedy ran for president as a disruptor. This is a new generation. We're going to take on new challenges. We're going to send a man to the moon and bring it back within a decade, at the time when there wasn't even the technology to do it. A disruptor. And when Jack Kennedy was assassinated, his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, continuing the disruption that Kennedy promised, Lyndon Johnson brought about one of the largest, at least economic and social, well, really both, revolutions in American history. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Great Society, Medicare, Medicaid. He literally created all those things from scratch. People are sitting around going, Medicare for all, that's too big. You can't do that. It's a too big. Well, Lyndon Johnson created Medicare to begin with, right? Huge, disruptive. Reagan came along in 1980 and said, I'm going to disrupt things. And people thought, oh, well, maybe this will be a good thing, right? I mean, Reagan was considered a radical, an extremist. Democrats referred to him as Ronnie Reagan. And he was a disruptor, and he did change America, not in a way that I'm happy about, but, he got elected and he got reelected and was beloved by his party anyway for a long, long time. And Bill Clinton came along in 92 and campaigned as a disruptor. Now, he didn't actually disrupt anything. In fact, he kind of extended the Reagan Revolution. Not kind of, he substantially extended the Reagan Revolution. And then the next president who came along as a disruptor was Barack Obama. And his disruption was historic. In addition to being the first African-American president, he also went back to the theme that Franklin Roosevelt had talked about and that Lyndon Johnson talked about. Remember, Medicare, when LBJ originally passed it, within a decade was supposed to extend to everybody. Franklin Roosevelt proposed his second Bill of Rights, which included health care for everybody in the United States. He just died within a year of giving that speech, and Harry Truman couldn't pull it off. I'm not sure Harry Truman had it in his heart, but, Harry Truman was a decent president, but, not a great one. But in any case, my point is that each one of these guys, Obama campaigned on being a disruptor. What is change? Hope and change, right? Change, disruption. And then Trump came along, and he said, things aren't working out all that well. And he was right. 40 years of Reaganomics has taken a giant chunk out of the backside of the American middle class. A lot of things were not working. The rich were getting massively richer. Let's not forget, Trump said that he was going to raise taxes on rich people. He was going to bring back jobs from overseas. He's done neither of those things. Obviously, he's lowered taxes on rich people. He hasn't brought any jobs back from overseas. In fact, the new NAFTA, the USMCA deal that he cut has, again, incentives to move jobs to Mexico. But he campaigned on these things that seemed progressive. In his State of the Union address, he lied through his teeth when he said, I will not cut your Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid. And here we now see his budget. Massive cuts to Medicaid, functionally cutting back on Medicare and Social Security. So the bottom line, the American people know things are not right. And they want someone to metaphorically blow up the system. We, the American people, and this is why I think Donald Trump became possible, was because Obama was thwarted by Mitch McConnell in his efforts to disrupt America, to change things. Very effectively thwarted. He didn't even, McConnell, talk about spitting on the Constitution. McConnell didn't even let him have his Supreme Court nominee. That goes down in the annals of infamy, in my opinion. Mitch McConnell, one of the most unpatriotic members of, elected members of Congress in my lifetime. So the bottom line here, what I'm saying with all this, is that in my opinion, this election, this 2020 election that's coming up in November of this year, is not about left or right. Trump scrambled all that by adopting all these left-wing points, right? Like, I'm going to raise your wages. I'm going to reduce middle-class taxes. I'm going to raise taxes on rich people. I'm going to bring jobs back. We're going to blow up the trade deals, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't about left or right. It's not about socialism or capitalism. We have a capitalist system with large elements of socialism in it, from Social Security to Trump giving $28 billion to the farmers. When all the Republicans were screaming socialism, when Barack Obama gave $12 billion to the auto industry to keep it from going down in flames. Remember that? This is not about socialism. It's not about capitalism. This is about the status quo versus the disruptors. And to the extent that Donald Trump has an edge in this election, to the extent that Donald Trump has a chance in this election, it's the extent to which people believe that he is actually changing America. I think probably more than 50% of voters are not all that certain about what kind of change they want. They just know things aren't working. Their kids are 50 grand in debt. Their parents are having to go bankrupt in order to get long-term nursing care. They themselves are paying a fortune for health insurance and can't go to the doctor because they can't afford their copays. People know that we're screwed. And that's why I think that the Democratic candidate who most likely will beat Trump is a disruptor. And I can identify several disruptors, but I don't want to get into individual candidates in this. But I just want to be very clear. This is not just we need a revolutionary Bernie screed. I'm seeing several candidates who are talking about disruption, and I think that that's a good thing. And if we don't talk about disruption, and if we don't have a disruptor as our Democratic candidate, we're not going to get back all those people who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. All those people who voted for Bernie in the primaries and then voted for Trump. We need a disruptor. What do you think? We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In about 20 minutes, Greg Palast is going to come by and gloat, hopefully. He did such a great job. We'll be back. And welcome back. Mary in Arlington, Texas. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just heard you talk, and I just love to hear you talk.
Well, thank you.
But the only way I can see that we're going to defeat this man is talk the truth. He wants to do away with our Social Security.
He does.
And
He's
we
already
need
cut
to
it.
get on that stick real quick.
Yep, I agree. And he's already cut back substantially on the staff at Social Security, so it takes
Yes.
longer. You know, it's forever to even get in touch with anybody now. This is, you know, what these guys do, these Republicans do, when you've got a good government program that's actually helping people, but a bank or an insurance company might be able to make money doing the same thing, not as well, but make money doing it, is they'll break the government program. And Trump is breaking Social Security. On top of that, of course, he's already announced he's dialing back Social Security disability insurance. And yeah, I think you
But
are.
not only that, Tom, we have to jump on these things immediately. We have to start right now when they're talking about the things that on these primaries, and talk about them because the people are concerned.
Yeah.
They can't earn a living.
Yeah.
They cannot earn it. And
agree.
of course, Bernie tells us this, but the rest of them do not, and they need to.
I think that there are a couple of candidates who are speaking this way, and I mean Elizabeth Warren obviously is speaking this
But
way.
she stopped.
She has slowed
She
down
slowed
her
down anyway.
rise,
No
yeah.
matter what, she slowed down.
We'll see how it shakes out. It's the trends are fairly obvious. Bernie and Buttigieg, and I would say in some ways Buttigieg is a disruptor as well. I mean, he'd be our first gay candidate. He has talked
Who cares about that? Well, here in the South, they probably will care.
Well,
If
the
they
people
really
on the
know
right
it.
are going to get all hysterical, but I think that that might actually work for him. But that my point wasn't just that. It was that I think that he has come out. Buttigieg has come out. This is not an endorsement of him by any means, but he has come out and said we have to get money out of politics. And in fact, I think there's a broad consensus about that. Amy Klobuchar is talking about that as well. I think that many of the candidates at least those two candidates that I and others have kind of treated as, well, they're not really progressive, so we'll just discount them. If you look at their policy positions, they are so far to the left of where Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago, where even Barack Obama was 8 years ago. It is extraordinary how far this country has moved, that the people who are called the moderates right now, I'd say with the single exception of Joe Biden, the people who are called the moderates right now are actually substantially more activist, substantially more disruptive, substantially more progressive than our last two Democratic presidents. And they were damn progressive relative to the people before them. I mean, this is just a trend line through American politics, and I think it's a good thing, Mary.
People do not remember. I'm pretty old. I'm 80 years old. Mm-hmm. But they forget that, number one, Roosevelt's the one that introduced this. Then we had Johnson that brought it to fruition.
Yep.
And if he hadn't brought it to fruition, we would not be here. I remember when we went to school and had no supplies.
Yeah.
See, I am old enough to remember that we went to school, and this was the school. And it was all supplied. It was all free.
Yeah.
Free education, free everything.
Yep. Mary, I got to run, but thank you for the call and thanks for your words of wisdom. We'll be right back. It is 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the hidden history of voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Wow, what a day, huh? Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I love the idea what you say about disruptors, because there are good disruptors, and as you've listed, there are bad disruptors.
Right,
Lord knows the current
Reagan
one.
and Trump.
Yep, exactly. And you were also correct when you said it's not about right versus left. It's about right versus wrong. So how can we be disruptors in a good way? And here's the answer. The thing is that every lie, every single time Trump and the GOP tell the lie, I don't want to use the word smack them, but you get the idea, with the truth and raise awareness all around. Look what happened over the weekend. He went on this tirade. It was State of the Union. There was no State of the Union address. It was State of Division with a whole bunch of shenanigans. And then he fires 2 ambassadors for testifying at the House impeachment hearing.
Yep.
Now, these right-wingers, they want to keep saying, oh, the president can hire and fire anyone he chooses. But let's not forget one thing. And here's where the truth of the matter comes in, and this is whether you're president or you're not president. A, you cannot fire someone for arbitrary reasons, and B, it is illegal to retaliate against someone that reports you. So
That's
there,
correct.
I just cited 2 illegal acts of Trump within a week already. So this is what we got to do. Don't you think?
I do. I completely agree with you, Michael, and I think that those are really important things. And thanks for your comments. And let me just add to that. Michael's point's really well taken. For example, Kevin McCarthy, the limited IQ guy. He's the theoretical leader of the Republicans in the House. I'd say actually probably Charles Koch is the leader of the Republicans in the House. But in any case, or Freedom Works, what's his name? I was going to say Matt Schlapp, but I'm not sure. No, he's CPAC. But in any case, Kevin McCarthy came out and said, oh, yeah, well, you don't want a Democrat because you're going to get a recession. Well, a recession is queued up. It's coming regardless of who the next president is. But let's look at who was president when we had our last recessions. In 1953, it was Eisenhower, Republican. In 58, Eisenhower, Republican. 60, Eisenhower, Republican. 69, that would have been Jerry Ford, as I recall. No, it was a Republican. Nixon. 69, Nixon. 73, Nixon. 1980, that was Democratic. That was Jimmy Carter. 1981, Reagan, Republican. 1990, Bush Sr., a Republican. 2001, Bush Jr., a Republican. 2007, Bush Jr., a Republican. Virtually every single one is a Republican, causing a recession.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
With the single exception in 1980, the year that Reagan was running for the White House. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Oh, actually, we're going to be back with Greg Palast in just a moment. Then I'll pick up your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice is in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, "Hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests, so we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away." At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate, interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdain as sellouts disdaining as sellouts those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And speaking about going to Los Angeles on the book tour on Saturday, both Stephanie Miller and Greg Palast are going to join me at the Sportsman's Lounge, I believe it is? Lodge. Sportsman's Lodge. There we go. Hotel at 1 p.m. on Saturday. Stephanie Miller and Greg Palast, and there's more information at kpfk.org. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Tom.
It's our old buddy Greg Palast, the peripatetic investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His most recent piece, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Greg Palast, PALAST.com is his website, and his Twitter handle is Greg_Palast, just like mine is Thom_Hartmann. So I understand that Judge Eleanor Ross, this federal judge, gave you a giant victory over the guy who's the governor of Georgia now because he was able to steal a vote from Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp.
That's right. In fact, I got to tell you, I could have been knocked over by a feather because, Tom, the Brian Kemp, who I had the absolute stone cold proof he stole the election from Stacey Abrams, removing 340,134 people from the Georgia voter rolls because he said that they had moved. They never left. I have their names and addresses. I know, our experts found out where they could be. We sued this guy to bust open his files because he was playing games with Chris Kobach. He was using Georgia cross-check lists, Georgia voter rolls, to remove voters from 30 other states in coordination with Chris Kobach. And I need the inside on that. So he said he never did it. The judge basically called him a liar and said, we don't even need a trial. And without my lawyers asking, the judge said, you've lost, Mr. Kemp. You lied to Mr. Palast. You're going to open up your files and give him the material.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. No trial. I didn't even ask for this because that's way beyond what anyone in litigation can imagine. But for Brian Kemp and for the GOP ballot burgling machine, this is not good news because we're cracking open their files everywhere. It also underscores a new trick that the Palast Investigative Fund is using, and I'm doing this now for The Guardian USA, which is we are using the National Voter Registration Act, threats of lawsuits. We've filed several. Kemp is the first loser, to open up the files of these guys who are purging the voter rolls around America, Ohio, Michigan. I was just in Wisconsin. So this is a gigantic win in a federal court for, in the fight against vote thievery. And by the way, we had great people working with us, including Helen Butler of the Georgia Coalition for New People's Agenda. And that is founded and headed by the Reverend Joseph Lowry. If you don't know that great civil rights legend, please learn about him. I spoke to him. He's 95. And he said, Brian Kemp is just Jim Crow all over again.
Yeah.
This is a big win.
And in fact, in my home state of Michigan, I understand tens of thousands of voters just before the last election, and I don't recall Trump's victory in Michigan. I think it was 17,000 votes or something like 14,000.
10,700.
Okay, tens of thousands of voters with names like James Brown and Mohammed were purged from the Michigan lists because Rick Snyder, the Republican governor of Michigan, said, oh, these people are also on Brian Kemp's list that he sent us from Georgia. So obviously they're voting in both states. They must be, voting in Georgia and then hopping in their cars and driving like a bunny up to Michigan and then illegally voting here in Michigan. And he purged their names. All these people showed up to vote. They were given provisional ballots, which are never counted unless an election is contested in a court of law. And therefore their ballots were never counted. But when the exit pollsters said, who'd you vote for? They said, oh, I voted for Hillary Clinton, and that's why the exit polls show Hillary Clinton winning, but the actual tabulation shows Donald Trump winning. Do I have all that right, Greg?
Well, in fact, I went to the Secretary of State of Michigan and showed him the Georgia list he was using, the list from Brian Kemp that he was using in Michigan to knock off voters. And he says, yes, we are aggressively using that list. Aggressively.
Wow.
I estimate 50 to 60,000 Michiganders, almost all of them voters of color, were removed before the 2016 election, about 5 times Trump's supposed margin in Michigan.
Yeah,
we're going to crack this all open. We're going to haul Michigan into federal court as well, and get the skinny on this and bust it.
Yeah, this is why I wrote this book, the Hidden History of the War on Voting. And,
yes, it is.
And thank you for the blurb on the front cover.
Let me endorse it.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's amazing. No, you really want it.
Yeah.
I thought I knew everything about voting.
I think it's important that we spread this message. Greg, you mentioned the National Voting Rights Act, or it was referred to back when it was passed in the 70s, as I recall, called the Motor Voter Act.
Yes.
And the Republicans...
No, in 93 under Bill Clinton.
93, okay, thank you. And the Republicans absolutely hated this thing, and they said, if you give states the ability to automatically register people to vote when they get a driver's license, then blah-de-blah-de-blah, But the reality is that, it hasn't been putting phony baloney people on the voting rolls, and it has been a big thing. But the important thing is, in 2000, in Bush v. Gore, and Anthony Scalia, who was Rehnquist. Mr. Rehnquist, Chief Justice Rehnquist, famously is quoted in that decision as saying there is no right to vote for President of the United States in the Constitution. There is no constitutional right for individuals to vote for the President. Now, of course, he was referring to the Electoral College, but the Motor Voter Act, that 1993 piece of legislation, in its preamble says voting is a right in the United States of America.
Fundamental right. Yes, a fundamental right. And it is also, and very important for lawyers listening, it's also in the text, which is very important, which gives it weight of law.
That's correct.
So we have it in the national law, but they do everything to undermine it, and that's why, unfortunately, after 20 years, Tom, I'm still on the vote-thieving trail.
Well, this is the important thing. This has never been adjudicated at the level of the Supreme Court, and that's why it's being largely ignored by the Republicans. But if the Supreme Court, and this is my last book on the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America, but if using judicial review, the Supreme Court was ever to say, yes, that's constitutional, we actually do have a right to vote, then all this kind of stuff that Brian Kemp and these nearly 30 Republican governors are literally doing right now. This is their election strategy for 2020, is to purge as many people as possible, particularly people of color, off the voting rolls. And they're doing it, and they're getting away with it. If that particular part of the Motor Voter Act could be adjudicated, it could change everything. What do you think?
Well, that's why we turned over our files to Stacey Abrams' organization, Fair Fight, and our experts are working with her because she's taking that on directly. As a journalist, I'm always busting open the files, but now the files are in the hands of people who are ready to go to the Supreme Court to change the law.
That's a good thing. So what's next? You now have access to Brian Kemp's records. Is he saying, oh, yeah, no problem, I'll get them to you by 2029?
Well, that's the thing. It's always I got to chase the guy around. Last time I got him at at a pig roast.
Yeah, I remember the video.
Yeah, and so I got to chase. This is one of the problems. I got to chase this guy around. They lie. They say they don't have the papers. The judge was just fed up. So I don't know. I guess the judge could find him in contempt if he keeps up this game. But what I'm very interested in doing is saying, look what I did to Kemp. And by the way, he's got to pay me now. Here's what I did to Kemp. If you want to take me on in Michigan, if you want to take me on these right-wing groups
Wisconsin.
in Ohio, and I just came back from Wisconsin, by the way. That's the other place I'm going. Because the reason went to Wisconsin, unusually, you had an uprising which got rid of Scott Walker and put in not only Tony Evers, but his lieutenant governor, Mandela Barnes, an African-American who's deeply committed to protecting voters. And the state Republican-controlled legislature passed a law to remove 247,000 people in almost all of them in Milwaukee and Madison, that is Democrats of a darker hue. And the state is fighting the purge because you have a right-wing organization called Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and backed by the right-wing billionaire Bradley family. And they are suing the state to force the state, this is crazy, but to force the state to purge people that the state itself has now said, this list is phony. This list it's called ERIC. It's kind of a cross-check light, but it's 247,000 names, and so I'm telling the state that I'm going to have my experts go through that list name by name. I can tell you it's completely phony. They are fighting this purge. So you have an unusual situation in which a state is actually fighting a purge, but the Republicans are desperate. Trump won Michigan by less than 23,000 votes. This is 10 times, so they're trying to purge 10 times as many people as Trump's so-called victory margin in 2016.
Republicans know the only way they can win an election is by cheating. I mean, that's the bottom line. Greg, we're out of time, but real quickly, what can people do who want to learn more information? Where can they go? What should they do?
GregPalast.com and read me in the Guardian USA.
Okay, you got it. Greg Palast, our old friend, and Saturday, Greg and I and Stephanie Miller, this is part of my book tour, will be at the Sportsman's Lodge Hotel in Los Angeles at 1 p.m. And more information at kpfk.org or TomHartmann.com and GregPalast.com. Thanks, Greg.
Welcome, Tom.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit TomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Greg Palast, he's really one of the good guys. We'll be back. I'll be picking up your calls right after this break. And welcome back. Let's see here. Beth in Ojai, California. Hey, Beth, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, I've been listening for a little while, and I have a couple of different points. I wrote them down. First, you wanted feedback on a change in politics. And in Hawaii, there's an action being taken, and there'll be a third party, a brand new party on the ballot called Aloha Aina Party. It's for state the governor and down votes. And it's aloha versus no aloha because the politics there is kind of corrupt. So that's the one point. But you also mentioned nuclear, and then you said, to raise hell with Congress. And I thought, well, gosh, San Onofre, we need protection because there's 8 million residents who live within the 50-mile radius. So that's probably the most important thing is just to have attention drawn to San Onofre. But also, we have the opportunity in Hawaii to vote for someone who's not corrupt.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Thanks, Beth, for the heads up on that. That's fascinating stuff. Susan in Snellville, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Great. What's up?
Good. Well, to your conversation earlier about Georgia and election, here in Georgia is about a 50-50 split for Trump voters and Democrats. And from what I see, that I've lived here for 48 years, all of Trump supporters in North Gwinnett County and above is all based on racism. So my main question that I wanted to ask you, though, is that if we're supposed to want a fair election, how are we going to have a fair election if we can't even get a fair caucus because in Iowa, it was the white supremacist group 4chan that had Trump supporters interrupt the phone system. And tonight he's having a hate rally in New Hampshire to disrupt the traffic.
Right.
So how do you fight that?
Well, you just have to acknowledge it and do the best you can, Susan. I mean, these guys are flailing. They, you know, the Reagan policies that have been embraced by the Republican Party ever since 1980 have done so much damage to the American middle class and American working people. And people are, you know, they've figured it out, and they're sick and tired of it. And they're getting it that, you know, even if Trump lies through his teeth in the State of the Union address that he's going to protect Social Security and Medicare and all this kind of stuff, they know that his budgets don't say that. His party doesn't say that. The people around him don't say that. He says, "I love clean air," and then he cuts, you know, pollution protections. "I love clean water." "Oh no, you can dump coal waste right into the rivers now." You know, people are figuring this out, and in terms of, you know, dealing with their tactics, their disruptive tactics, their you know, I mean, illegal tactics, frankly. I mean, back in 2000 or 2002, there were 4 guys in New Hampshire who went to jail for
I remember that.
For calling, you know, for tying up the phone lines of the Democratic Party when they were doing their get out the vote stuff. So, you know, number one, we have to do what Greg is doing, fight them in the courts. Number 2, what I'm doing right now, what you're doing, calling into this show, fight them in the halls of public opinion, as it were. And number 3, we need to get every person that we know activated and out there. Susan, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the 3rd in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Jennifer in Stillwater, Minnesota. Hey, Jennifer, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I look forward to seeing you at the AM 950 ball.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be great fun. That's coming up.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just wanted to say that I was going to have you ask Greg Palast to comment on the Iowa caucus and what happened with the Democratic Party there, because like your previous caller from Georgia and yourself were talking about, you know, like Republicans jamming up stuff during the general election. But the thing is that, you know, there's, as a person from a caucus state, Minnesota, you know, I mean, it wasn't just inherently the caucus that was the problem. In fact, this year they did have satellite caucuses in Iowa, which were filled almost exclusively with Latinos and Somalis, Eritreans who work at the pork processing plants. And the Democratic Party stopped those results from coming in until the very last minute. They were in the 3%, you know, after the 97%, you know, came out. And they had to have those caucuses during the day, and they were the last to be released. And the Iowa Democratic Party, Troy Price, who ran the Hillary campaign, you know, he released the results. As a person from a largely rural state, Minnesota, who did caucuses, here's how it works. The big city results, Minneapolis, St. Paul, they release their results first all the time. And people like Bernie win the big cities. And they did the opposite in Iowa this time. They deliberately released the rural areas first and waited days and days to release the Bernie areas in the big cities.
Yeah, I noticed that. Didn't Jefferson have somebody on this show last week to talk about that? I thought he had an expert on about
I
that?
don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
But,
I'd send him a note lobbying for it, but in any case, Jennifer, I don't know the detail. I should have asked Greg, but he's not here. I'm sorry, and I don't have any details specific. I've read all the news stories and everything, and I've read the conspiracy theories. It seemed to me like they were basically rolling out the data in a way that would not look good for Bernie. I'm still wondering why the newspaper, the Des Moines Register, which does the gold standard poll every year. Somebody in the Buttigieg campaign apparently complained about that, and so those results never came out. And the word is that Bernie was winning that substantially. I just don't know, but and I don't want to wander into the area of conspiracy theory beyond the facts that are out there. And perhaps I just did that, so I'm gonna pause this right now. Jennifer, thank you for the call. Chris in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom. We're getting way off the topic. You said the topic was supposed to be how do we beat Trump?
Right.
I think the only way to beat Trump is to make this a referendum on Trump. Do you approve of Trump? Do you approve of his actions? Do you approve of his policies? Do you approve of him as a person or not? Not anything else such as socialism. Saying America doesn't know or care. If you have to spend hours defining what democratic socialism is, you've lost.
Yeah.
And likewise, it shouldn't be, we want to do health care for all and Medicare for all, and then go on to the various nuances or Elizabeth Warren's 20,000 50-page policy papers. It should be strictly about Trump, period. Let's get rid of him. We wait 4 years.
I don't think that's enough, Chris. I don't think that, there are a lot of people who are fed up and sickened by this man in the White House. He's behaving like a mob boss and may well be one. But people want something to vote for as well as something to vote against. I agree that, the taking on Trump, taking down Trump, removing him from office is a big piece of what any Democrat needs to campaign on, and they all are and will continue to. But I disagree that it could be the only thing that we need to fight on. Mary in Franklin, Tennessee. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I agree with everything you say usually, and it looks like we have a new hero in Greg. And my question is, why isn't Mitch McConnell charged with obstruction of justice? The House had a legal obligation in the Constitution, well, not to impeach Trump, but the power of impeachment. And he foiled it by not having those witnesses.
Yeah.
How is it that he hasn't been charged?
Well, let me just explain it very, very straightforward, Mary. The Constitution simply says the House will impeach, that is, indict, and the Senate will hold the trial, and the Chief Justice of the United States will oversee that trial. It doesn't provide any detail beyond that. There is no body of law beyond that. There's only precedent. And so, Mitch McConnell, the Senate writes their own rules for the impeachment. They literally voted on those rules. They did not negotiate them with Chuck Schumer or the Democrats. The Republicans wrote their rules, and they conducted the impeachment based on those rules. And that was the beginning and end of it. So it shouldn't surprise us, I suppose, that they didn't allow any witnesses and that they didn't allow any evidence into this trial. But that's what happened. Coming up next, Congressman Ro Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be with us for an entire hour taking your calls. So if you're on hold, if you don't have a question for Congressman Khanna, you can hang up right now. And if you can change your question from one to me to one to him, go for it. And if not, get ready. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 3, Hunters in Our Schools and Offices, The Origin of ADHD. The earliest theories about attention deficit disorder characterized it as a diseased state that had to do with brain damage or dysfunction. At various times, it has been lumped in with fetal alcohol syndrome, mental retardation, various genetic mental illnesses, psychiatric disorders resulting from early trauma or childhood abuse, and the theory that parental smoking led to fetal oxygen deprivation. Prior to the 1970s, when ADHD was first characterized as a specific disorder, ADHD children and adults were largely treated simply as bad people, even though attentional deficits have been recognized in the psychological literature since 1905. They were the kids who always got into trouble, the James Deans of the world, the rootless and unsettled adults like Abraham Lincoln's father, the Lone Ranger, or John Dillinger. More recent research, however, has demonstrated a high incidence of ADHD among the parents of ADHD kids. This discovery caused some psychologists to initially postulate that ADHD was the result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. They suggested that ADHD may follow the same pattern as child or spousal abuse, moving through generations as learned behavior. The dietary-causing advocates contended that children's pattern their parents' eating habits, and this accounts for the generational patterns of ADHD. Other studies suggest that, like Down syndrome or muscular dystrophy, ADHD is a genetic disease, and a specific gene, the A1 variant of the D2 dopamine receptor gene, has been identified by scientists as the leading candidate. But if ADHD is a genetic disease or an abnormality, it's a popular one, possibly afflicting as many as 25 million individuals in the United States. Some estimates put ADHD as occurring in 20% of males and 5% of females. Other estimates are much lower, hitting a bottom of 3% of males and 0.5% of females. With such a wide distribution among our population, is it reasonable to assume that ADHD is simply a quirk, that it's some sort of aberration caused by defective genes or child abuse? When the condition is so widely distributed, inevitable questions arise. Why? Where did ADHD come from? The answer is, people with ADHD are the leftover hunters, those whose ancestors evolved and matured thousands of years in the past in hunting societies. There is ample precedent for genetic diseases, in quotes, that in fact represent evolutionary survival strategies. Sickle cell anemia, for example, is now known to make its victims less susceptible to malaria. When living in the jungles of Africa, where malaria is endemic, it was a powerful environmental tool against death by disease. In the malaria-free environment of North America, it became a liability. The same is true of Tay-Sachs disease, a genetic condition that hits mainly Eastern European Jews and confers on them a relative immunity to tuberculosis. And even cystic fibrosis, the deadly genetic disease common among Caucasians, 1 in 25 white Americans carries the gene, may represent a genetic adaptation. Recent research indicates the cystic fibrosis gene helps protect its victims at younger ages from death by such diarrheal diseases as cholera, which periodically swept Europe thousands of years ago. It's not so unusual, apparently, for humans to have built into our genetic material protection against local diseases and other environmental conditions. Certainly, Darwin's theory of natural selection argues in favor of such bodily defenses. Those individuals with immunities would survive to procreate and pass along their genetic material. As the human race moved from its earliest ancestors, two basic types of cultures evolved. In the areas that were lush with plant and animal life and had low human population density, hunters and gatherers predominated. In other parts of the world, particularly Asia, farming or agricultural societies evolved. Be it pursuing buffalo in North America, hunting deer in Europe, chasing wildebeest in Africa, or picking fish from a stream in Asia, these hunters needed a certain set of physical and mental characteristics to be successful. Number one, they constantly monitor their environment. That rustle in the bushes could be a lion or a coiled snake. Failure to be fully aware of the environment and notice that faint sound might mean a swift and painful death. Or that sound or flash of movement might be the animal the hunter was stalking, and noticing it would mean the difference between a full belly and hunger. I've walked through forests and jungles with modern hunter types in the United States, Europe, Australia, and East Africa, and one characteristic always struck me. They notice everything. A flipped over stone, a tiny footprint, a distant sound, an odd smell in the air, the direction in which flowers point or moss grows. All these things have meaning to hunters, and even when walking quickly, They notice everything. Number 2, they can totally throw themselves into the hunt. Time is elastic for them. Another characteristic of a good hunter is the ability to totally focus on the moment, utterly abandoning all consideration of any other time or place. When the hunter sees the prey, he gives chase through gully or ravine, over fields or through trees, giving no thought to the events of the day before, nor not considering the future, simply living totally in that one pure moment and immersing himself in it. When involved in the hunt, time seems to speed. When not in the hunt, time becomes slow. While a hunter's ability to concentrate in general may be low, his ability to utterly throw himself into the hunt at the moment is astonishing. 3, they're flexible, capable of changing strategy on a moment's notice. If the wild boar vanishes into the brush and a rabbit appears, the hunter is off in a new direction. The book ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us from Washington, D.C. Is Congressman Ro Khanna. Hang on just a second, Congressman. I've got to put him on the other. Boy, you get out of, you leave town for a week and everything gets out of whack. Congressman Khanna, welcome.
Great to be back on, Tom.
We're trying to connect with you on Skype. Just an FYI, apparently since Microsoft bought Skype, they've got some sort of security thing, and they've got us locked out right now, and we're not sure how to get it in. And Nate's working on it while we're talking. But so for right now,
the security apparatus has always blocked speech, but they don't tend to block the things that actually need blocking.
Yeah, it seems. But anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today and for taking calls for the hour. We've got a bunch of people stacked up waiting to talk with you. But first, I just wanted to get your take on everything. I was out of town all last week, and I have not been on the air. So it's been a couple of weeks since we talked. The state of the Democratic primary race, the state of our country. I'm assuming you were at the State of the Union address. Whatever you'd like to just offer your thoughts on to start our hour here. And by the way, I should just tell everybody, Congressman Ro Khanna represents the what is the district in California? 17th District of California, Silicon Valley. He's the vice. Say that again.
You got it right.
Yeah, okay. Right. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and Rep. Ro Khanna are his website and Twitter handle. So, Congressman, your turn.
Perfect. Well, the State of the Union was the worst of the three I've seen, and that's saying something. But you had an utterly manipulative speech where the president would basically try to recognize someone who was a genuine American hero. Usually everyone stands up and applauds. You have a war hero or someone who has overcome medical hardship. And then the next line would be a cynical manipulation saying, well, that's why we need to cut welfare, or that's why we need to cut school funding. And I've never seen anything like that. I mean, usually you don't politicize American heroes in the way he did. But he has absolutely no standards. And then to give Rush Limbaugh the Medal of Honor. I mean, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, unbelievable, especially in light of the fact that many real veterans, many civil rights icons were in the audience, and for them to see Rush Limbaugh being honored in that way was just deeply disappointing. Today, the president sent his budget to Congress, slashing Medicare, slashing Social Security, slashing food stamps, SNAP. And, this is the challenge. I mean, the president's rhetoric is one thing. He lies, basically, tells the American people he's not going to cut these programs. But then he submits budgets which cut exactly these programs.
Yeah, what's the old saying, Nancy Pelosi's old saying, actually, show me your budget, I'll show you your values. I think we're seeing Trump's values. And the Republican parties, I mean, they've been consistent on this. They fought Social Security in the 1930s and called it socialism. They fought Medicare in the 1960s, called it socialism. They fought long-term, unemployment insurance in the 1930s, called it socialism. Name your program that Americans love. Republicans have fought it.
Yeah, the only thing Trump does is he has just the same intentions, if not more, of cutting these programs. But he is politically shrewd enough to realize that that's a non-starter. You can't win an election. So his solution is, let's just lie. Let's just tell people we're not cutting it and cut it at the same time. And, he's more shameless in a way than Paul Ryan or Mitt Romney was. And harder, therefore, to take one because he is willing to just stand up and blatantly lie to people.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour. Let's go to the phones here. Michael in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind? You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. I was curious how you think the DNC is going to be able to defeat Trump if they can't even count. And then once they do count and they inaccurately add up the totals in the first caucus, and then the attorney says that they can't change the math and show what is accurate because it would falsify the documents. How is it that they're not giving a reason for independent voters to not vote for the fixed DNC candidate if we can't have a valid primary? How do you see us defeating Trump with the DNC pulling tricks such as that?
Look, what happened in Iowa was unacceptable, but let's just put this in context. I mean, Bernie Sanders won the popular vote. In terms of delegates, there were tied. Now Buttigieg is up one or two delegates, 14-12. In the context of 1,990 delegates that you need, I expect Senator Sanders will win in New Hampshire. I think he's going to do very well on Super Tuesday. And what we really need is to reform the process so you have better technology. And I don't understand this whole realignment and why you can't just have a person who won the popular vote get the most delegates. But I don't think it's just Democrats. I mean, the Republicans had this huge problem in 2012 where they had Romney winning and Santorum winning. So while I was disappointed with what happened, I think we have to move forward, and I'm confident it's not going to hinder Bernie Sanders' momentum.
David in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I'm particularly interested in the Green New Deal. I would like to know if there is a Green New Deal. Ohio suffers a lot from bad air quality and water quality. Would the federal Green New Deal influence the states to do the right thing as far as clean energy?
David, it would. First of all, in terms of clean water, the Green New Deal has $35 billion for our water infrastructure to be updated and upgraded. I mean, 16 million Americans don't have access to clean water without certain particles or contaminants. And it would fundamentally upgrade the infrastructure. It also would make massive investments in solar and wind and have those jobs be located in places like Ohio and across the country.
Joe in Cupertino, California. Congressman, your audio is really, really ragged. It kind of sounds like you're talking from the bottom of a tank here. I don't know if you can fix that. But anyhow, Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks to Jefferson. It was really great to talk to him. And the Thankful Thursday came up, and I thought of Ro. I'm thankful for Ro, and I got a chance to vote for him yesterday. And I just wanted to say that I don't know how we can get Trump off the hook with the emoluments clause. We haven't seen his taxes. And you sit on oversight, and he's been able to say that he's been absolved, but yet the request was put in some time ago, and yet we have not been able to see his taxes. I'm hopeful that the election will clarify this, but I'd like to see a careful accounting and some reconciliation on the part of oversight so that we make sure when he is out of office, we're able to go back and find out where the money is. Your thoughts? The emoluments clause.
Joe, I agree with you that Congress has to continue our oversight function. We need to first have John Bolton testify and get the testimony that has unanswered questions of what the president did on Ukraine. And I agree with you on the emoluments clause. I mean, it's not just the president staying at his own hotels. It's not just the president privileging his own friends. There's rank corruption in many parts of this administration, of self-dealing, of enriching their friends and donors. And we need to have documentation of all of that so that a new president can have systemic reform by having an anti-corruption agency, and so that people can be held accountable after they leave their offices.
Robbie in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up Iowa. I'm actually particularly concerned that you're still quoting the numbers. I don't know if you've been paying attention to it as much as I have or as much as people who are trying to make change in this world are, but basically the numbers that they're releasing are botched. There's been 3 different caucus captain precincts, I don't know whatever their names are. They've released their results, and it is not matching up with the Iowa Democrats' results. Basically, they found that there is 3 different counties, I think 3 different elections where they have the same exact votes, the same exact turnouts, and it's not the one. And there's people right now screaming for attention. But what I wanted to ask is kind of adding on to this, why, like, how, I'm just complete, and honestly, Tom, I thought you left all last week because you didn't want to deal with this. I thought you didn't want to deal with.
This is planned a year in advance.
Oh, no, I know, sure, yeah. But, you know, how am I supposed to take the Democratic Party seriously when this is going on, when they literally rigged an election again? And your book about Republicans, you know, doing voter suppression, isn't this election rigging at its prime? Pete Buttigieg paid $42,000 to that company that developed that app. And then on top of that, we're going to, you know, the Hillary Clinton advisors and the Obama advisors who were developing this app, we're going to sit here and pretend that this is just some kind of discrepancy with.
Let's get the congressman's response. We're going to hit a break in a second here, Robbie. Go ahead.
Well, Robbie, look, there are discrepancies. The Sanders campaign has requested a recount of 41 precincts. So let's just be clear, right? That this was I don't believe that that Iowans cheat or that there was any rigging. I think that there was incompetence in a number of places. But Sanders won the popular vote, and he has 12 delegates, and it's a long race. And I guarantee you that if he wins the popular vote, he will be the nominee at the end of this process.
We'll be right back at 16 minutes past. They're coming up at 17 minutes past the hour here. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. And welcome back. Congressman, I'm going to be getting absolute hell from my radio stations here. If you can pick up a phone instrument and talk to us without a speakerphone, it would be so helpful.
Is this better?
That is 1,000 times better. Yeah, I mean, it's
okay,
just.
I don't understand why. Usually we do this way. I don't understand.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry. It was bad.
Maybe because Skype is not working.
Yeah. Okay. John in Carbondale, Illinois. John, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. Boy, as usual, waiting on the line even. Your callers are so smart and you touch so many things. It's like it's the only place to trust to get information almost anymore is your show. But actually a couple things that remind me of what the Congressman saying just now again with how bad the State of the Union was. It was horrible with Guaido up there. But what I really wanted to ask the Congressman was, I thought I saw a couple months ago, I've been meaning to call in, you talked about the BDS and you couldn't support it all the way because parts of it led to not recognizing the State of Israel, and I would agree with you if that was the case. But I'm wondering, too, if that is the case, how is it we can kind of deal with the dichotomy that, what is it, in a third or a half of the states in our own country that the state governments won't do business with people if they do support BDS. So I'm just wondering, how can we kind of approach and criticize Israel's treatment and the right-wing government over there, and yet at the same time, if that's true about BDS, parts of it not supporting the statehood of Israel?
Well, I think you raise a fair point. I mean, my view is that we have to be for a two-state solution. We have to understand Palestinian rights to statehood. We shouldn't be for annexation, and we shouldn't do anything to suppress people's speech here or penalize individuals or companies that make a choice of what they want to do in the Middle East. I just don't think our government should be making a policy of saying that we support sanctions and massive divestment from Israel. I don't think that that's going to help peace. And in general, I'm skeptical of sanctions as too broad an instrument and too blunt an instrument. It should be only used as a last resort.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, we've got our video back. In fact, we've had it back since about two minutes into the show, so we're on the air. Nell in Sterling, Virginia, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, I just wanted to ask the congressman, who's following up on the statistics from Trump about the jobs and the unemployment and everything? I mean, he has showed us that he can do anything he wants, and also to make his own statistics.
Yeah, this is a great question. Is Trump rigging the economic data, Congressman?
Well, no, he's certainly misleading people about the data. I mean, for example, he made this big statement in the State of the Union that there's been a 50% increase in the bottom 50% wealth since he's been president. Well, the increase has been from 1.1% to 1.6%. So now the bottom 50% have 1.6% of the wealth as opposed to 1.1%. But it's not significant. In the same way, he's cherry-picking how he talks about the data. The bottom line is good-paying union jobs, good-paying manufacturing jobs are down, and they haven't been created in the battleground states or in the Midwest.
Yeah, and they're all under assault. We will be back with more of your questions for Congressman Ro Khanna in just a moment. Stick around. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna, is on the line taking your calls. Max, watching us on YouTube in Germany. Hey, Max, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I just had a question. I've been listening and reading Greg Palast's book since 2001, and he's been screaming about voter suppression in the southern states mostly. And I'm wondering why the Democrats haven't gone after that more aggressively in the past 20 years. And then just as a last note, over here in Germany, they're having the elections in March, and my friend got called for election duty. How's that for an idea? He has to go and count the votes.
Because they do it all on paper ballots, and you get called up for election duty like it's jury duty, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't have a choice. You have to go.
Yeah, there you go, Congressman.
Well, Max, I appreciate the call. In fact, I'm headed to Munich with the speaker later this week for the Munich Security Conference, so maybe we can look up and understand what Germany does. But I think you're absolutely right that there should be some civic participation requirement, maybe like jury duty for election duty, especially given the need to protect our elections. And the scandal, which is what it was, of people being purged from the rolls, of voting places closing down in minority communities, of people being given misinformation of where they were going to vote, of hours being curtailed. That is, I agree with you, the biggest disenfranchisement, more than even the Russian interference in 2016. I mean, there was systematic efforts to get black people not to vote in this country. And had that not happened, Hillary Clinton would easily have won, in my view, both the popular vote and the Electoral College. John Lewis talks about this almost every day on the House floor. House Democrats passed the reinstatement or strengthening of the Voting Rights Act because it was struck down in H.R. 1. But it's tough to get the media attention for it, and I appreciate your raising it.
Pat in LaPorte, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khan. I am concerned about President Trump's active retribution against witnesses like Colonel Vindman. And I just want to know, is it illegal what he's doing? And if so, why isn't he being stopped? Why isn't something being done to stop this?
Pat, it is illegal. The challenge is when you are impeached and your own party says we're not going to hold you accountable, there's very little motive or incentive for him to follow the rules. But, of course, retaliation for whistleblowing or telling the truth is blatantly illegal. And this is the consequence of the Republicans' failure to hold this president accountable. All of those senators who said, well, we hope he has learned his lesson, we hope he's remorseful, we hope he won't do this again, they should know that one day after the acquittal, he's doubling down. And that's what I fear in 2020. If by some chance he wins re-election, he's going to have almost no constraints on him. So it's a very difficult situation, and it's the consequence of one party totally abdicating their constitutional responsibility.
Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hello to both of you. Thank you for taking my call. I've been looking at laws that were violated with everything that Trump did that brought him to the impeachment trial. And the thing that stands out to me is that these guys were running around on taxpayers' dime for what Fiona Hill called a political agenda. And that, I was wondering if anybody could officially, any people in Congress could write the GAO to get them to look at that and find out if his campaign should be billed for the money that was involved in all those guys running around trying to get Zelensky to, do the deed and all that kind of stuff.
That is a great point. I mean, there has been so much abuse of taxpayer money by this administration using these trips for political purposes. And certainly in the case of Zelensky, the purpose was completely political, and we should try to get reimbursed. I am dubious, though, that it's going to be effective. I mean, the president is going to blatantly misrepresent again that he was doing this for corruption, and he knows he's got the Republican Party willing to back him up in whatever he says. But I think having the oversight hearing call in GAO and try to get them to make an administrative determination of reimbursement is certainly worth exploring.
Yeah, this even goes beyond the $650 a night he's charging the Secret Service to stay in his hotels. It seems.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. And I mean, he's basically using the apparatus of the American government for his own political advantage. And you have a Republican Party basically turning a blind eye to all of that.
Yeah, what a tragedy. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. Check out his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and he's taking your calls right here for an hour. We'll be right back. Congressman Ro Khanna. Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls for the hour. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California. And Mark in San Francisco, listening on 9:10 a.m., where I will be doing this show on Monday and Tuesday, I think, of next week from. Mark, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, gentlemen. How you doing today?
Great.
Great. My question is, it looks like Trump's going to run on the economy, but how can we have a great economy when you got to cut Social Security and Medicare for seniors, and what kind of economy is that going to have for them?
Mark, it's a great point. I mean, the economy that Trump is running on is one that is tax cuts for the wealthy and has no understanding for how difficult it is for seniors or working-class Americans to pay the bills. I mean, if you cut Social Security, how are they going to have retirement? How are they going to afford housing? How are parents going to be afford to send their kids to college or get prescription medicine? That is the Democratic vision on the economy, that every person should be able to afford the basics of what it takes to be in the middle class. And that's the contrast we will draw.
Reginald in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, yes, thank you, Congressman Khanna, for being one of 8 representatives to go against the $737 billion war spending budget. And we're talking about, we're looking at Black History Month, and Dr. King said we need to put this money instead of war on a poor people's campaign. Now, if we are talking about we need Social Security, we need housing, we need the food stamp voucher, we need all these programs, and if you and what Bernie Sanders said were true, and I could not support you for that, why did all of the Democrats go and vote for this, and we didn't do what you guys suggested? We could have negotiated, because that opened up war for Iran, and then cut social services and programs for $737 billion that has been tripled and duplicated since 2002. Where can we hold our Democrats accountable for that, the same way that they got up and bipartisan with Venezuela? I'm trying to get behind us. I'm supportive of Bernie, but when we get you guys in office, then you vote against the will of the people for whatever reason, a motive he had. That is not humanitarian and a war against poverty and on the poor people's campaign and trying to keep peace in the world.
Reginald, I appreciate the very eloquent question. I mean, you're absolutely right that we have voted, many Democrats including, have voted for a defense budget that increased the expenditure $120 billion from where Obama left it. Bernie Sanders and I opposed it. There were about 48 Democrats who opposed it. but that $120 billion could pay for every American to get free public college, to get free trade school. It could pay for school lunch for every American. And it's really a question of our priorities. The budget, the defense authorization also had my amendment, which would have prohibited the Soleimani strikes. We had zeroed out funding for any offensive action against Iran. My amendment passed the House. It had majority support in the Senate, but it was stripped in the negotiation, and I think our side acquiesced too easily to giving the Pentagon a blank check and all of the money they wanted. We need to be much stronger in standing up against endless war and investing in our priorities.
Julie in Somerset, Kentucky. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, I was calling to ask, is there any movement in the Democratic Party behind getting rid of the Electoral College?
Julie, I think there is a movement called the 270 vote compact, where states voluntarily are passing legislation saying they will allocate their electoral votes to whoever wins the popular vote. And of course, once you get states that total 270, that will become the process. So my sense is that's the most effective way to do it. In the meantime, we need to campaign in these states and realize that we did have a president very recently, Barack Obama, who overwhelmingly won the Electoral College twice. So it's not impossible. I think I'm biased, of course, because I'm Bernie Sanders' co-chair, but I believe he will win the Electoral College if he's the nominee.
Suzanne in Rosharon, Texas. Am I saying that right, Suzanne?
Mr. Ro Khanna, I like you as a senator, but I'm so concerned about us moving into a proto-dictatorship, and I'm too old to be put through this strain. Can y'all please get rid of Trump? Please.
Well, Suzanne, thank you for your call, and I hear this concern all the time. I mean, Trump is shredding many of the basic norms and institutions of our democracy. One of the things I think we've all learned is that it's not that what keeps democracy going is not just the actual separation of powers and institutional laws. The president has disregarded that, but also the norms of a society that most leaders observe. And this president lies without any second thought, has coarsened the public debate, has elevated vulgarity, and has no respect for the competing branches of government. So I agree with you that it's going to take a long time for this country to recover. We are a very resilient nation, and the future is bright when you look at some of the new members of Congress who the country is electing. But every day that Trump is there does more harm to our nation.
James in Spokane, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, at least we're not in jail at this point, guys.
Yet.
Yeah, count our blessings. Not in the hospital, too. That's good. The point I want to make, these corporate Democrats are I can't believe this. Juan Guaido was at the State of the Union address, which is not surprising, unexpected, but not surprising. But Nancy Pelosi gets up and applauds the guy. You know, that's just turned my stomach. But the thing that may be more important, is it possible that these corporates are trying to privatize the stock market, that they're buying back their stock, and that way in a crash, at least they as a group would not suffer? Is that what's going on with that stuff?
I think the stock market's already privately owned. Congressman?
Well, sir, I did not stand up and clap for Guaido, and I think this is a case of American military intervention or foreign policy overreach that is not in our interest. I mean, the biggest thing we could do for Maduro, and I don't think Maduro is a good actor. I mean, he has hurt his own people. When I had met with President Carter about a year ago, Carter was concerned that the elections weren't fair and free. But what we're doing is giving Maduro a huge advantage when we go and intervene. He goes and rallies his people saying, look, the Americans are intervening in our process. So it's not just that there's a moral concern. It is politically naive to have this policy. What we should be saying is let Mexico, let Uruguay, let the Pope mediate, let's have regional mediation. America has no interest in this kind of excessive intervention.
Greg in Naples, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello.
I just would like to know what the congressman thinks we can do to cut through the corporate media bias, especially from MSNBC and Chris Matthews suggesting that Bernie would be for public execution when I think Bernie is actually against the death penalty. And I don't know how many times they're going to ask him how you're going to pay for it when his answer is it costs less. We can't afford not to do it. So the DNC needs to go left or lose again. The only thing that would lose the election and give Trump another term would be the DNC trying to keep Sanders out of the race.
Well, Greg, I appreciate it. One of the things we're all doing is listening to Tom's show. That's an alternative media. And I'll tell you something, and I'm not saying this just to flatter Tom. When I go out campaigning, I get more people telling me that they heard me on Thom Hartmann's show than that they heard me on MSNBC. So I think there are a lot of alternative media forums that we need to take advantage of. The second thing is that Bernie Sanders' platform actually is very simple. He basically believes every American should have the same opportunity that this country gave to me, a son of immigrants. I had a good public education. I grew up in a middle-class family that didn't have to worry about health care, didn't have to worry about school lunches. My parents didn't have to worry about child care, and I had a great opportunity at the American dream. I mean, I represent Silicon Valley. Bernie Sanders is not talking about making Apple computers a government-owned entity. He's not talking about anything radical. What he's saying is let's fulfill the New Deal so every person has the chance to get a future in this nation. And I believe that that's why it's resonating with so many millions of Americans.
Yeah, and it clearly is. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California, Silicon Valley, in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Ro, R-O, Khanna. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Brandon in Wildwood, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Congressman, I got 2 Bronze Stars in combat. I appreciate what you do. I'm from the South. I live out here in Wildwood, Missouri. But I just want to ask you a question. Why is it that white America vote against their interests when they are the majority in everything? Social Security affects them. Medicaid affects them. Welfare affects them. What is it that they just don't understand why they constantly vote against their own interests, sir?
Well, Brandon, Reverend the Barber with the Poor People's Campaign actually, I think, is trying to work towards building this coalition between Black Americans and working-class white Americans. And his point is that the tools of racism and institutional racism that have divided blacks and whites and that have disenfranchised Black Americans actually serve the interests of a very narrow set of Americans, and that a coalition between working class whites and Black Americans and Asian Americans and Latino Americans actually would lead to policies that better everyone and not just the top 1%. And so what you're saying is I think, that the tools of institutional racism are hurting both Black and white Americans. And the hope is that someone like Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign can build a coalition to overcome that.
Linda in Auburn, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I wanted to bring up an idea and see what he thought about it. And the idea is based on what they have done at least 20 years ago or so in Guadalajara, and maybe still are in Mexico. And with voting, they would, a precinct is like a neighborhood, like 300 houses in the U.S. Their neighborhood would have quite a lot more people in it, but they would come to a neighborhood place, like even a grocery store, and they would know people, and they would elect people from the precinct, like officers of the precinct, to count the votes. So you would have the votes counted right there, and then you would just call it in, and they would look on TV. And so each neighborhood would validate their own vote.
and didn't cost very much, right?
In the 1950s, my mom was an election official at the local elementary school where I went to school when I was a little kid, and that's exactly what they did, Linda. Congressman?
Well, it sounds like a very common sense idea to me. And some of these things are less to do with fancy apps or technology and more to do with common sense values and having people elected or from a community to make sure that you're verifying results. It makes a lot of sense. And I think we have to really look at what we can do to return to a place where our vote is counted and people are assured that our vote is counted. And that's one thing to note is even if the process is correct and there isn't any manipulation, if people are losing faith in the process being correct, that's corrosive for democracy.
Yeah, and I should add, my mom wasn't elected to that; she volunteered. But I remember them staying there after the vote was over and count. I'm assuming that they were counting paper ballots. This is when I was like 10 years old or younger. But there's a long history here. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us. He'll be right back with more answers for your questions here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. When you pick it. Welcome back, Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls. And Brian in Greenwood, South Carolina, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, my name is Brian, and I was just wondering, do you think it's possible that we will hear more rhetoric about a balance? Because so many people think that Bernie's all about socialism and that's it. And I think Bernie's the best. And I used to vote Republican all my life, but not anymore. But so many people, all they do is badmouth socialism, and they don't realize that capitalism is part of Bernie's platform too. So that's my question.
I appreciate that. Bernie is a FDR Democrat. He basically is looking to fulfill the ideals of the New Deal in the 21st century, which means everyone should get education, everyone should have health care, everyone should have access to a opportunity to get a good paying job. And that is about making the free market work for everyone and not just for the very few. And that's a message, frankly, that can appeal to progressive Democrats, independents, moderate Democrats, and Republicans. It's a message of what we need to do to truly make our economy more inclusive.
Andy in Boston, Massachusetts, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, I just wanted to know if you had the same policy as Bernie Sanders on your immigration, which is don't go after the weakest among us, go after the people that are employing them, and if that's your motto, too.
Andy, I agree. And Thom Hartmann, as you know, has been saying this for the past 20 years. I mean, if you really want to go after the exploitation of immigrants, go after the companies. They're the ones that are paying below market wages. They're the ones that are benefiting. It's not the most vulnerable. By the way, very quickly, when the ban happened of migrant workers in 1964, and they weren't allowed to pick tomatoes because there was some view that that would help American workers in my state of California. Guess what happened? 98% of those jobs were automated. So it didn't actually end up helping American workers. The people who are the culprit often are the big corporations. It's not the marginal immigrant.
Allard in Anthony, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. My question is this. What about the changes or the recent proposal changing the Social Security disability requirements?
Robbie, it's going the wrong way what the Trump administration has proposed. I mean, basically, they're making it harder for people who are disabled or unable to work to get basic enough income to sustain themselves. And what we need to do, if anything, is expand the Social Security disability insurance, where people can't live on $14,000, $15,000 a year salary, and we need to provide more flexibility so individuals who are disabled can get benefits, but also have some flexibility of working and be able to save more than $2,000. So we need to expand that SSDI program, not cut it as Trump would do.
Francis in Palm Springs, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your great show. And Congressman, I would just like to know, how will Bernie combat the disinformation campaign that is going to take place, because he seems to be the one that will be the nominee? And also, does he have a plan to go down and to win the Senate? I'll take your answer off the air.
Francis, there are two very thoughtful questions. He's going to combat the disinformation campaign with an army of volunteers. We need to have millions of people in this country mobilized. They need to be the ambassadors for truth on social media, knocking door to door with voters, talking to people. I mean, we know that Trump is going to dump $100 million into Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan the day after we have a nominee. And the only way you beat big money, the only way you beat special interests, is by having a mobilized group of citizens who want change. It's the only way change has ever happened in this country. In terms of the Senate, I am optimistic that we can take back the Senate with Bernie Sanders as the nominee. I believe anyone who votes for Bernie Sanders as the president is also likely to vote for someone who is a progressive for the Senate, because they know that Bernie Sanders needs a progressive Senate for things to pass. The final point I'll make is when people say, well, right now the votes aren't there. If you had taken that attitude, we would never have had the Voting Rights Act. We would have never have had Medicare for all. We would never have had the Immigration Rights Act of 65. We never would have had the Affordable Care Act. Votes are never there magically before leadership. It's leadership and movements that bring the politicians along, and that's what Bernie Sanders is trying to do.
Yeah, I was listening to this commentary, I think it was Chris Matthews last night, and he was talking about, the votes aren't there, just give it up. And I'm thinking, what if Susan B. Anthony had said that? She died before women got the vote. What if Harriet Tubman had said that? I mean, let me just toss that to you.
It's the most frustrating critique of Bernie Sanders of all of them. I mean, how much of the New Deal or FDR's program would have been there if someone looking in 1931 had said, well, what are we going to have the votes for? Or how much of Lyndon Johnson's program would be there if someone in 63, 64 had said, well, what are we going to have the if that was the case, why do you need political leadership? Just pick anyone to be president out of a phone book. Now, that's better than Trump, probably, but there is something about having leadership.
There you go. Congressman Khanna, it's so great having you on the program. Thank you so much for dropping by as frequently as you do. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the show. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day. We'll be back. We're going to be talking with Ingrid Newkirk. Some surprising stuff about animals, and we're going to continue our conversations about politics, and I'll continue taking your calls, and I got a few more rants to share with you too. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, And the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
In my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Ingrid Newkirk. She's got a new book out along with Gene Stone. It's titled Animal Kind, Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary New Ways to Show Them Compassion. Ingrid, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Tom.
I should add, you are the founder and president of PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, an organization that I have known about, worked with. I gave a keynote speech at one of your, this was back in 1980, I think, 1980 or 81, one of your early conventions. I can't remember the name of the guy who ran the program back then. But anyway, I've been with you guys for a long time, and I think it's just wonderful what you're doing. IngridNewkirk.com, by the way, the website, and of course, PETA.org, PETA.org. Tell us what you learned in researching this book. What were the most remarkable discoveries in your mind?
Oh boy, Tom, I thought I knew just about everything because I collect all this information about news reports of animal communication and intelligence and emotions and so on. But in researching the book, I learned huge numbers of things I didn't know. And it's hard to know where to start. But for example, you mentioned the intelligence tests we talk about in the book. And there is one now called the gold standard of animal intelligence. I mean, take it or leave it. This is what researchers now use. And it's to show how intelligent an animal is. So it's called the mirror test. And if you can recognize yourself in the mirror, you're intelligent. Tribal peoples have problems with this. Chimpanzees have been able to think, oh, that's not someone attacking me, that's me. A little tiny fish called the wrasse, who is also known as the teeth-cleaning fish, because you can watch this on National Geographic. Big fish line up for this little fish to go in their mouths and take out the debris between their teeth. This tiny fish can recognize herself in the mirror, and she not only recognizes herself, but she starts to preen, just like Kim Kardashian.
That's remarkable. I have one cat that does and two cats that don't. It's remarkable stuff. Where are we at in this country and in this around the world? Obviously, there's a lot of things are much worse in many parts of the world than they are in the United States. But broadly speaking, where are we at in the way that we're treating our fellow, particularly mammalian, but across the species spectrum, our fellow animals on this planet? We tend to forget the fact that humans are animals.
Yeah, so we're always at war with each other. Our own species is always killing itself. But it runs the spectrum, really, Tom, because we've come so far, and people, in part, thanks to the internet and all the videos you see, people do realize that animals are thinking, they are feeling, they experience fear and love and joy, and they want to be free and all that sort of stuff. But we also are not only beginning what Joaquin Phoenix on the Oscars was talking about, this connectedness that we have to feel with all the other species, that we're all in this together, but we still do some atrocious things like trophy hunting, for example. Botswana just opened up elephant hunting for the first time in years, so that was a regressive step. And we still have so many animals in laboratories. We've got rid of a lot of tests. We just got rid of the forced swim test, where they drop these little animals into beakers of water, and they struggle desperately. And the researchers just record how long it takes for them to stop struggling. I mean, ludicrous things like the Harlow experiments you mentioned. But we also still do psychology experiments on animals that are hideously cruel, taking monkeys away from their mothers still in some experiments. And, of course, we're seeing the rise of veganism. We're seeing the rise of vegan clothing. We're seeing an end to cosmetics tests on animals. But we're seeing an end to circuses that use animals. But on the other hand, we've got a long, long way to go.
I thought one of the most, I'm always looking for turning points, and in fact, back in, my wife and I became vegetarian in 67, 68, way back in the day. And really as part of our anti-Vietnam War activism and flirting with transcendental meditation and stuff like that. But maybe a year ago, I think it was, Arnold Schwarzenegger produced a movie for, as I recall, it's on Netflix. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's called Game Changers. And it's about all these world-class athletes. I mean, literally the strongest man in the world, the fastest woman in the world, these extraordinary athletes who are all completely plant-based diet, no animal products whatsoever, and they're not doing it because they're compassionate about animals. They're doing it because it's the optimal way to achieve good health and peak performance. And in the middle of the movie, one of the guys who's making the movies, his dad has a heart attack, and they put him on this diet, and boom, his heart disease resolves by 6 months down the road. I mean, it's just amazing stuff. Are we seeing major tipping points like we saw in the 60s, largely coming out of pacifism and spirituality, now coming out of health and this emerging sense of compassion, that we're all sentient beings here on this planet?
Yeah, absolutely. And Game Changers, I can't recommend it enough. I'm a Formula One race car fan, and the world champion is Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis is actually an ethical vegan. But once he became vegan, he has said nothing has improved his race more. And he is now, I think he's 7-time world champion. He's opened a vegan restaurant in London. And all these athletes, Rich Roll, long-distance runners, there's a German weightlifter who can pull a truck with people in it, a school bus with people in it, all vegan. And so people say, well, where do you get your protein? And nowadays you think people are learning. You can have vegan anything you want. There are taste-alikes that aren't made from animal flesh and blood and milk and eggs and so on. But also it is cleaning out your arteries. It's getting you away from obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer. So yes, there is a huge health push. There is a huge push among athletes. The Williams sisters, the tennis sisters, they are vegan too. And it's really exciting for many reasons, but compassion obviously is what we need to have for each other. And we need to learn more about animals and learn how they are not just like us, they are us. We're all in it together.
Yeah, people say, where are you getting your protein? And I said, well, you're eating, dead cows and pigs, or dead cows anyway. Where did they get their protein? And they give you this blank look, like, well, didn't you know cows are vegetarians? I mean, elephants are vegetarians. It's like some of the most powerful animals, hippopotamuses, rhinos. I mean, they're all vegans, I mean, essentially. So
stallions, yes.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, Tom, I have to tell you, we talk about human heroes. Animal heroes I have in the book, but one I didn't get into the book was during the LA fires. This horse I saw on the news, was about to be loaded into a trailer, and the horse farm behind him was completely enshrouded with smoke, and behind that was the fire. And suddenly he heard something, his ears pricked up, and he ran back down the road and into this smoke-filled ranch, and everyone's heart was in their mouths saying, oh, God, don't go back in there. And he had heard a mare, Winnie, and he went back in, he found her and the foal, and he led them all out to safety on the road. I mean, that's like The Rock in some Hollywood blockbuster.
Yeah,
you know?
That is truly remarkable. It's a marvelous book. It's called Animal Kind by Ingrid Newkirk and Dean and remarkable discoveries about animals and revolutionary new ways to show them compassion. Ingrid Newkirk, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom.
And the website's Ingrid Newkirk, spelled just like it sounds, and of course PETA, PETA.org, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. Wonderful stuff. We'll be back. It is 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Tim in Los Angeles. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I know I'm not good at this at all, but I'm going to bear with me.
Sure.
Anyway, I think that we need to message about, in order to beat Trump, I think we really need to message out there about how he's stealing our children's future and how he's treating children in this country and all the suffering that's going on. Because it's been proven that, this is a quote from somebody, that people don't tend to revolt until they're watching their children starve. We don't want to get to that point, you know?
Well, we have, I believe the number is around 10 million children a year in the United States who go to bed hungry. I don't recall the number of minimum. Yeah, it is. And then on top of that, you've got another 20, 30, 40 million Americans who don't, who are afraid to go to the doctor. They can't afford it, even if they're insured. They can't handle the co-pays or the deductibles. Food, shelter, lodging. I mean, it is an abomination. Tim, thank you. Your point is really, really well made, and I appreciate your call.
One more thing.
Yeah.
I want to say one more thing. Is that the Democrats are spending so much time, about on the details of their programs. People aren't interested in that. People are interested in their own families.
All right.
Hello?
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that it's wise to keep to the big picture and keep talking about the kind of damage that the Republicans are doing to this country. Jim in Belvedere, Illinois. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, this is more for the congressman, but
he's gone.
I think if Bernie is the nominee, I'd like to see him expound on a vision where he sees this country going with his policies, because I do believe in his policies, and I do believe we need a mix of capitalism and a strong social safety net to create a floor for the market.
Yeah, well, Bernie has laid that out, as has Elizabeth Warren, that both of them are in favor, aggressively in favor of strengthening workers' rights, strengthening consumers' rights, having.
Same old stump speech. same old stuff.
But see, I think it will, because what it does is it resonates with people. I can't tell you, Jim, how many people I've told this story a million times, but I think it's really important for people to hear it. I lived for 7 years in Washington, D.C., in a marina in Washington, D.C., the Capitol Yacht Club, a relatively upscale where everybody's living on boats, right? And I'm surrounded, probably a third of the people there, maybe as many as half, were military or ex-military, particularly the Navy and the Coast Guard, and an awful lot of them were Republicans. And I know personally, and became friends with, 7 people who had consistently throughout their lives voted nothing but Republican, who all voted for Bernie in the Democratic primary, and then voted for Trump in the general election. Those voters are out there. Bernie's message, and not just Bernie's message, but a progressive message in general, resonates with them. They want change too. Now, I'm not saying that the Democratic Party should be jumping through hoops trying to get Republicans or swing voters or whatever you want to call those folks in to vote. What I am saying, because I think that really we just need to turn out the base, but beyond that, I think that it will be overwhelming if we have a genuinely progressive candidate. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I've written several op-eds over the last year or so laying out Bill Barr's history with the corruption of the George Herbert Walker Bush administration and the Reagan administration that he was essentially an extension of. George Herbert Walker Bush put Bill Barr in as Attorney General. Bill Barr then supervised the cover-up of the Iran-Contra scandal, Reagan's and Bush's Iran-Contra scandal, and also covered up a scandal that was called Iraq-Gate back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, where the Reagan administration was selling weapons of mass destruction illegally to Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein was then using those weapons in his war with Iran. And at the same time, we were apparently selling to Iran satellite maps showing the movement of the Iraqi soldiers. Those two countries each lost over 1 million men, or people, mostly men, soldiers in that border conflict that they had that lasted all those years. And we were feeding it from both sides. It was against the law. Congress had passed a law making that illegal, but Bush and Reagan did it anyway. And Bill Barr covered that up. Now you've got Senator Lindsey Graham, just in the last 24 hours. I don't know if it was last night or this morning. I caught it on the news today. No, it was on Sunday. It was on the Sunday shows. Senator Lindsey Graham coming right out and telling God and everybody that Bill Barr is our Attorney General, our Chief Law Enforcement Officer, is apparently participating in some sort of a extra governmental enterprise. I mean, this is extraordinary. Saying that again, a United States Senator, Lindsey Graham, saying that the Attorney General of the United States is conspiring with a private attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who works on behalf of Donald Trump as an individual, not as the President of the United States. He's not an official lawyer. In fact, Giuliani was being paid by Lev Parnas with money from a Ukrainian or Russian oligarch. So now we've got Giuliani collaborating with the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States to try to go after Joe Biden and his son. And it's increasingly not even looking like Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, although, don't count your chickens or don't anti-count your chickens, as the case may be. But, I mean, what are they going to do if it's somebody else? What kind of, is Bill Barr going to be using the FBI to investigate Pete Buttigieg's background? Are they going to be looking into Bernie Sanders? Are they going to be, wiretapping Elizabeth Warren? Are they going to be following Amy Klobuchar around? I mean, I guarantee that operatives of the Lev Parnas, Igor Fruman type, Republican dirty tricksters, like, Chuck Colson back in the day with Ed Muskie, that they're already following these candidates around and doing what they can, but it becomes a whole completely different thing when the Department of Justice gets involved. Of all the agencies in government, when you look at what happens when authoritarianism takes over a government, whether it's extreme authoritarianism like you saw in Germany in the 1930s, somewhat less extreme authoritarianism like you saw in Italy and Spain during the 1930s, a little more moderate authoritarianism like we're seeing right now in Hungary, in Poland, in the Philippines, Bolsonaro trying to pull this off in Brazil. Frankly, even on, arguably on the left, and I put that in quotes because, you see the so-called, Chinese communism combined with authoritarianism, the old Soviet Union. When that happens, the single most common event or characteristic of an authoritarian takeover is that the apparatus of justice, the criminal justice system, the investigative agencies associated with it, the police agencies, charged with enforcing the laws, and the court system are taken over and are turned away from justice and toward the goal of supporting the authoritarian regime. If we value democracy in this republic, if we value the symbols and the values of this country, if we hold those dear, then the most frightening thing that could happen in the United States has to be that our Department of Justice would become the tool, the naked tool of an individual politician or political party. Bill Barr did this before in the 1990s, in 1992. He did it with the Iraq-gate, the weapons of mass destruction scandal during the Reagan administration. He did it with Iran-Contra during the Reagan administration, and he's doing it again. And this is, at least according to Lindsey Graham, he's doing it again. The Justice Department came out and said they didn't deny it. They said a spokeswoman for the Justice Department declined to comment on Mr. Graham's assertion. That's a quote from the New York Times. Now, you would think that they would say, what? Use the court system, the justice system, the criminal law system of our country as a political tool? No, we would never do that. The Attorney General would never do that. That's what they should have said. But that's not what they said. This concerns me tremendously, and it should concern you as well. First they came for the communists, right? I was not a communist, so or the socialists, I guess it was. And then they came for the trade unionists. And, the Pastor Niemöller story. This is grim stuff. First they came for Hunter Biden.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
When is it that they come for you and me? We'll be back with your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, "Hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests, so we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away." At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change, but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts, those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms, is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Well, you've heard some of my rants for the day, and tomorrow is election day. We'll do a straw poll tomorrow and see how people are inclined, as it were. And but my biggest concern, and I think sometimes that the only 2 people in this country that are taking this seriously are me and Bill Maher, at least in the media, is that we are sliding toward fascism. This is what I was just talking about a moment ago. When you see the Justice Department being politicized, that is serious stuff. So, anyway, I'll talk more, presumably tomorrow or Wednesday. I'll talk more about this. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I want to talk to you about the 3 Bs, and I don't mean Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. I mean Biden, Bernie, and Bloomberg. These candidates are undoubtedly one-term presidents, should they win. And, I mean, Bernie will be 80 in 2021. Biden is about less than a year younger than Bernie. Actually, Bloomberg is older than Biden, I was shocked to find out. Bloomberg is 9 months older than Joe Biden. So what this tells me is that, or what I started to think about is, who they choose as a running mate is vitally important in carrying their legacy forward. And yes. I think that whoever, if Biden or Bernie gets the nomination, they have to choose somebody else on that stage. Bloomberg obviously will not, because he thinks all of them are inadequate to begin with. So he would choose, as Hillary Clinton did, some moderate no-name, which is just not enthusiastic at all. That doesn't generate enthusiasm at all, as Tim Kaine did not.
Right.
So I see that,
Paul, if I may, I'm not sure that Bloomberg would do that. I think that was an expression of Hillary's weakness, basically, and her knowledge of it in the polls. She was starting to haul her husband around like a ball and chain, and I'm not just talking about Clinton's sexual scandals, but people were figuring out that the Telecommunications Act screwed our media, that NAFTA screwed our workers. I mean, a lot of the things that Bill Clinton did, probably with the best of intentions, hoping for the best, actually turned out to bite us in the butt. But I don't think that Bloomberg, if he's the nominee, is going to think of himself as so weak that he needs somebody weaker than that to not be overshadowed. But other than that, I agree with your analysis. So where were you going with that?
Well, true enough, but oftentimes, in fact, normally, the president, the nominee, chooses somebody who's not overshadowing. I mean, you don't find presidents choosing. I don't know if there ever has been a president who chose one of the competitors in the primary. I don't know. I haven't thought.
Reagan chose Bush. They fought it out in the primary. Let's see, who was Carter? I don't know. I had to go back and look election by election, but it has certainly happened.
Okay, it probably has. But in this case, when you have these candidates, because there's the extra factor of them, all three of them being, aged. And I don't have a problem with them being president, but Bernie making it to 84, but we have to think he might be able to win again at 84. But you know how it is, Tom.
Yeah.
Things change in a hurry when you're getting old.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like your first 10, 15 years of life, there's a radical change as you go from being a little tiny baby to a whole grown-up. And then the last 10 or 15 years of life, there's pretty radical change, deterioration. And, I agree with your analysis, Paul, and I agree that the vice presidents are going to be critical. And I hope that if it is Bernie, that he picks somebody who, Elizabeth Warren, for example, would be a good one, somebody who absolutely shares his values.
Exactly, and so I have my last question for you is there some way for the candidates to sort of telegraph that that's what they would do if they got the nomination, is to select someone else on that stage? Well, is there a way to do that?
Yes, although typically it's not done. In fact, I can't recall a time in my life when it was done, but I'm not an election geek. I'm more of a history and politics geek. But the way to do it would be if somebody drops out, say, to cut a deal and make the announcement, frankly, and probably the sooner the better. But we may be getting ahead of ourselves substantially here, Paul. But
except for that, in this case, it's likely because of the convention will probably be brokered with the way things are going, is that nobody is going to drop out.
Well, this is the, I shared on the air here with the permission of the person I had breakfast with a couple of weeks ago. Louise and I had breakfast with a fellow who's a part of the Democratic, he's one of the senior people in the DNC. He's a superdelegate. He's on the Rules Committee, blah-de-blah-de-blah. He's got, a bunch of great credentials. Yeah. And his point was that going into the convention, if one candidate doesn't have, the total is a little less than 4,000. So I think you've got to have something like 1,980 or 1,990, almost 2,000 votes to avoid a brokered convention. If you don't hit that threshold, then the 800 and some odd or 790 or whatever it is, roughly 800 superdelegates come in, and out of those superdelegates, there's about 30 of them who are progressives, and the rest of them are all going to go for whatever the corporate it tells them to do, and that would be a bad thing in my opinion. So what he said is if Bernie and Elizabeth can hang on to their delegates. And because they don't, it's sort of like a Venn diagram. It's not a circle above a circle. Bernie's, the people who are voting for Bernie and the people who are voting for Elizabeth Warren, there's a lot of overlap. But the overlap is not 100%. It's not even 70%. And there are a lot of women, for example, voting for Elizabeth Warren who've traditionally said that they wouldn't vote for Bernie because they still feel bad about Hillary. There are a lot of, there are people voting for Bernie who, I could go through the list, but there's no need to. Anyhow, the point is, if the two of them go into the convention with roughly 2,000 delegates between them, then what will almost certainly happen, and this is not inside information, he doesn't know this, I don't know this, but this was our personal speculation. What would happen would be that the two of them would sit down and say, okay, let's work this thing out. You be my vice president, or you be the Secretary of State. I mean, this is essentially what Obama and Hillary Clinton did in 2008. She said, he said, do you want to be vice president? She said, no, I don't want to be vice president. I would rather be Secretary of State. And realizing
that's true. Yeah,
and they work that out, and then they go into the convention and they eat everybody's lunch. If they don't work that out, then you got a brokered convention, and then you're going to have, probably, well, we'll see. I don't want to sound defeatist here, but
okay.
All right, Paul. Thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you, Edward in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Edward, what's on your mind today?
I'm fine, Tom. I was wondering
is there anybody out there still trying to get the subpoenaed information from the impeachment hearings?
Yes, you've got the Intelligence Committee is still trying to enforce their subpoenas. Adam Schiff is talking about having further hearings. Jerry Nadler with Judiciary is still trying to enforce subpoenas. They're talking about further hearings. Rich, what's his name? Richie. I'm forgetting his last name. The guy who's in charge of the one committee that has the legal power to actually see Trump's tax returns. I think it's Ways and Means. He is continuing to try to enforce the subpoena to the IRS that Steve Mnuchin is resisting, although the IRS and Mnuchin did turn over Hunter Biden's personal income information to the Republicans in the Senate, to Chuck Grassley. They're refusing to turn it over to the Democrats in the House of Representatives for Donald Trump. So, but, it's continuing. Why do you ask, Edward?
Well, I was wondering, do we just give up on all this? Are we ever going to hear what happened?
No, we don't give up.
I was just going to comment on what the Senate trial supposedly reminded me of. Remember when those 3 little girls died in the bombing down in Birmingham?
I do remember it.
And they brought the guys who did it to trial.
And they got off.
And it was, and everybody knew it was just a whole false thing, like set up, for the guys to get off in the first place. Yep. And that's what those Senate hearings reminded me of.
Yep.
And it was like, now.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, white America's got the same justice system that Black America had back then.
To some extent. I mean, there's still huge racial disparities, but I get what you're saying, Edward. And sure enough, it was an old Southern guy, Mitch McConnell, who was running this thing, with his.
Yeah, he knew how to do it.
Oh boy, did he ever! He definitely knew how to do it, and for probably generations, he and his friends and their families had been doing it down south. Edward, thanks so much for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'll be back with more of your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Michael in Seattle. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Greetings, Tom. Great show as usual. You had said earlier in the broadcast that about disruptors, and I couldn't agree with you more, except for, unless I heard you wrong, you mentioned that Pete Buttigieg could be seen as a disruptor.
Could be.
And I wanted to take...
It's a giant caveat.
Yeah, it's a giant caveat because I believe the case could be made that he's more of a mirage and a sleight of the DNC and corporate media's hand to take out the progressive majority. And that I agree also that at a brokered convention, and especially if we get into the ageism, that as they're calling him now, Mayor Pete, would be thrown in as a Democratic disruptor because of his lifestyle, or because of or that
because
his
he's gay.
War record.
Yeah, but
he's gay.
Michael, let me
anyway,
just.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, let me just qualify this. Pete Buttigieg there's two things that I've observed about Pete Buttigieg, well, several that I think are important for us to all keep in mind. The first is, as a gay man his entire life, he understands what it is like to be a minority in the United States, a persecuted minority.
Agreed.
And that's a perspective that pretty much no other white man in this country can claim outside of the gay community. So,
absolutely.
Number one. Number two, he actually served in our military in combat. And he's one of the few people who actually understands the real cost of war. That's an important point. Number three, I have heard him speak, and in fact, I tweeted support of him back a year ago when he gave one of his very first speeches, and he said, we've got to overturn Citizens United. We've got to get money out of politics. He was very emphatic about that. He's taken some progressive positions, and even his position of Medicare for anyone who wants it is radically more progressive than literally anything Barack Obama was proposing. So I don't see him as a stalking horse. I see him as a Kinsey consultant. This is the last data point for me about Pete Buttigieg, is that, fresh out of college with, his Rhodes Scholarship and everything else, smart guy. He goes to work for the world's leading consulting company, McKinsey, that does work for evil dictatorships and giant corporations alike. That he's more of a data-driven guy. And I think he's looking at this race and he's saying, you're going to get the largest majority of people, for example, with health care, saying if you want Medicare, you can have it. And within a few years, the insurance companies will be out of business because who wants to pay 20% extra for-profit health insurance, right? The problem with that, of course, is look at, Medicare Advantage, which is privatized. They'll figure out a slick way to screw us. But I think he's a smart guy, and I think he has the potential to be a disruptor. I just don't know if he will be, or if he will, just buy into the whole, the wine cave thing. We'll see. But if he's our nominee, I'm going to do everything I can to get him elected.
Well, I appreciate the caveat.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the call. It's good to hear from you. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Charles in Lara, Indiana. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was calling about the minimum wage, Bernie's minimum wage, $15 an hour.
Right.
It's my opinion. I'd like to know yours. If you raise the minimum wage, that raises the cost of living because whoever has to pay that extra money is going to pass it on to the consumer.
Nope.
And it's going to go all the way down. And if this company has raised their wage, then this other company's going to raise theirs. So your milk cars are going to go up.
Nope.
And what happens then is your middle class does not get the pay raise. So therefore, the lower class, the lower wage, is not really any better off, and the middle class is closer to the wage is lower.
It's a very clever logic, Charles, and Republicans have been using that logic since 1934 when Franklin Roosevelt passed the minimum wage. And the minimum wage has been raised 38 times since then, sometimes substantially, sometimes more than a single percent, real substantial wage increases. And it's also been frozen for the last, I think it's about a decade now. If it was true that raising the minimum wage at the federal level, nationwide, if it was true that raising the minimum wage increased the cost of living, then the Republicans would be able to tell you the year that happened most visibly. They would be going, but 1972, in 1972, the minimum wage went up 1%, the cost of living went up 0.8%. You would have that year burned into your brain, Charles. It has literally never happened. What happens when the minimum wage goes up is that companies tighten their belts, they pay their senior executives a little less, they reduce their dividends. They actually, because wages are tax deductible, their taxes go down slightly, so they have, they can afford to pay that. And the most important thing that happens when the minimum wage goes up, and we're seeing this right now in the 10 or so states that in the last 2 or 3 years, through mostly ballot initiatives, in a couple of places it was just, the politicians themselves, substantially raise their minimum wage. I mean, you've got a bunch of states, democratically controlled states around the country, where the minimum wage is now $15 or is headed toward $15 right now. And and in fact, this really started in a big way in the second year, I believe, of the Obama administration. I'd have to go back and look at the exact year when SeaTac, when the town outside Seattle where the airport is raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour, and everybody said, "Oh my God, if they're going to go bankrupt and the city's going to lose and cost of living's got blah." And what happened? Economic activity increased. Economic activity in every single state that has raised the minimum wage has increased. I believe that one of the main reasons why the economy is good enough that Donald Trump can brag about it right now, one of the reasons why unemployment is so low as it is right now, is because all these democratically controlled states have been raising the minimum wage. And the proof of that is that when you look state by state at increase in GDP year after year after year on a state-by-state basis, it is the Democratic states that are seeing the fastest increase in gross domestic product, in state domestic product. That's where you're seeing the economies grow without inflation, without an increase in cost of living. And the reason why is very, very simple. The principal driver of the economy, over 70% of all the driving power of an economy, is not the Fed. It's not the stock market. It's not taxes or federal spending or state spending. It's referred to by economists as aggregate demand. And aggregate demand is a fancy economist way of saying how much money people have in their pocket every payday. Exactly. Aggregate demand is a function of wages. So when wages go up, when people who are making $8 an hour are now making $15 an hour, they don't just put that money under the mattress. They go out and buy stuff. And when they go out and buy stuff, the people who sell stuff and the people who make stuff are selling more of it and making more of it, which means that they have to hire more people to sell it and make it. And that's a virtuous cycle. Whenever the minimum wage increases, economic activity goes up, and you can prove that looking at individual cities. You can prove that looking at individual counties. You can prove that looking at individual states. So the whole narrative that you just laid out, Charles, very easy to believe. I've heard it 1,000 times in my life. And it's, like I said, it's the sales pitch that the GOP started with in 1934. But there's absolutely, literally no evidence to support it. Ready to change your mind?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, listen, I understand everything you've said, and I agree with it. But the GDP will go up because people are spending more money. And they're spending more money, but are they getting more product?
Yes.
I don't think so.
If they weren't getting more product, you wouldn't have more GDP. No. If you have an increase in spending without an increase, what you're describing is an inflationary situation, and that's not what happens.
It is an inflationary.
No, if you're increasing your spending and you're increasing GDP and you're not increasing standard of living, that's inflation by definition. And that's not what happens when the minimum wage goes up. Talk to any person who owns a business, Charles. Wages are only one of many expenses. And in many industries, wages are the principal one. In many industries, they're a minimal one. And when wages go up, companies figure out ways to accommodate that. And the best way to accommodate it is to have more demand for their product or service. Charles, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Interesting, and thank you for respectfully letting me rant, and I hope I treated you well, too. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is Election Day in New Hampshire. It's going to get real interesting in the next 36 hours, so stick around. Stick around right now wherever you're listening. Whoever's following me will no doubt be doing a great job. But stick around tomorrow. I look forward to talking to you about this. It's going to be a fascinating day. And thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So please get out there, get active, tag You're It, and tell your friends where they can find this program and other good progressive media. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!